Welcome to Crossroads. We have some big stories today. First, I want to ask you all a question. How are Washington, D.C. police solving fewer murders despite having more cases? We're talking about this. Also, peaceful non-cooperation is stopping the anti-gun laws from working, and sanctuary cities are preparing for what they're calling a nightmare winter with mass migration. All this and more. Let's talk first about what's happening in Washington, D.C. Now, fewer murder cases are being solved, and this is despite the fact that the number of murders is increasing. This trend suggests something is taking place in the American justice system, and this, I would say, it should be seen in context of the BLM riots and Democrat defund the police movements and other woke campaigns that have severely damaged law enforcement. Let me show you this first. This is Breitbart. It says the percentage of homicides that are solved by the Metropolitan Police Department has declined sharply in 2023, leaving the city on track to record its lowest so-called clearance rate or closure rate in more than 15 years. It says as of November 13th, only 75 of the 244 homicides committed this year have been solved by police, factoring in the 33 prior year homicide cleared thus far in 2023. The overall closure stands at around 45%. That would be the lowest rate dating back to at least 2007, according to statistics provided by MPD. Now, it says nationally, the average clearance rate tends to hover between 50% and 60%, according to a professor of criminology they spoke with. Now, what does this mean? Well, it's likely a mix of problems, in my opinion. I would say on one serious issue, police, in a lot of cases, are unable to do their jobs. Police, for example, if they want to go into a community where they've been demonized, they're going to be attacked. They're going to be criticized. People will refuse to cooperate with police as witnesses. For example, if police try to do their jobs, they risk getting, labeled or attacked themselves. Police are worried that they could get prosecuted or have their lives destroyed if a situation turns violent. God forbid they show up and someone's trying to stab someone right in front of them, and the police officer has to shoot the individual trying to murder somebody else, and then gets put all over the news claiming, police violence. That's an actual case, by the way. Then you have the issue of woke prosecutors. Prosecutors who don't seem to care about actually putting people behind bars, and prosecutors who will let people off the hook, including in some cases for serious crimes, yes, including murder. You have underage people who have committed crimes, including killing people, who get off on bail and sometimes a slap on the wrist or relatively slap on the wrist charges. Now, this is going to cause some other serious issues for our country. Namely, I would say street justice. The purpose of the justice system, at least one of them, is to mediate grievances and really to have a just outcome when a crime is committed. The idea is that if two people are in a conflict with each other, one person feels they've been wronged by the other, and maybe both people in some ways feel they were justified by or the person who committed the crime sometimes feels justified in it, the justice system needs to step in and mediate that conflict. If a person hurts another person, they need to make sure justice is served to alleviate the, let's say, tension that is developed. And if that justice system is not in place, what happens? The individual who feels they were wronged no longer turns to the justice system and they take it into their own hands. Now, that can be a dangerous situation, especially when you have people who might overreact, which often does happen when you don't have kind of a rational system overseeing the process of, again, meting out justice. And when the system of justice are no longer a source of justice, well, again, that's what happens. I would say America is very close to that situation. If people no longer feel the justice system is going to give them the justice they want, or even serve justice at all, you're going to start having a breakdown within that system, at least in my opinion. Also, something else interesting is happening right now. We talk a lot about how there's different movements to push these anti-gun laws all across the United States. And it seems now that even when laws are passed, there are actually large-scale movements of people just simply not cooperating with them. And this is now being shown in Illinois. The state passed a sweeping anti-gun law, and citizens in the state are just simply deciding not to abide by it. They're not going to cooperate. Now, one of the law's requirements in Illinois is that owners of certain kinds of rifles must register them with the state police or risk being arrested, according to PJ Media. And it says the deadline for registering the guns is January 1st, 2024. And let's just say there's not a rush to register the firearms. They say this: as of November 21st, just 3,439 gun owners registered nearly 6,600 guns they owned before the firearms became illegal to possess in the state. How many firearms are affected in the state? They say they know the registered weapons throughout November 21st represents less than 0.1% of the 2.4 million firearms in the state. What does that mean? It means that 99.9% of that campaign to try to take away people's guns has failed. Or at least to have them register their guns in this case. Because what's happening? Well, people are simply not cooperating. Why are they not cooperating? Well, many citizens refuse to cooperate with anti-gun laws because they believe that such laws are unconstitutional. And they understand that if they were to fight these charges in court, if they got arrested for it, for example, they would likely eventually win on constitutional grounds. And take what just happened in Oregon is one of many examples of that. BJ Media has this story. It says, it turns out that bullets are an essential part of a gun. This is actually something big to talk about, by the way, because you have a lot of anti-gun lawmakers who are saying right now, well, Constitution says we can't restrict people's rights to own guns, so we'll go after the ammunition. And so they're trying to regulate ammunition sales as a way to ban guns by proxy. Well, it turns out that doesn't work. Again, back to what happened just now in Oregon, it says that limiting the number of rounds in a gun violates the local constitution, the state's constitution. It says a county judge in Oregon made that decision on Tuesday, overturning Measure 144, a citizen-passed measure that outlawed what gun grabbers call high-capacity magazines, and require that Oregon serfs get a permit to get allowed to purchase a gun. Now, in California, you might remember they also tried banning so-called high-capacity magazines. What's a high-capacity magazine? It's a name that anti-gun advocates came up with that had no meaning before this. It means basically a magazine that holds your ammunition that you can load into a gun that oftentimes has more than maybe 10 rounds. In other words, a normal magazine. They should be calling it a normal magazine ban and not a high-capacity magazine ban. But regardless, both in California and in Oregon, that's been overturned in many cases. Although in California it tends to flip-flop. We'll probably see it go to the Supreme Court eventually. You also have something else happening with the gun grabbers. Many sheriffs have publicly stated they will refuse to enforce any laws that violate the Second Amendment. The genius of the Founding Fathers shows itself yet again. The sheriffs are elected officials in the United States, and the sheriffs are sworn to protect and uphold the Constitution and protect it notably against enemies both foreign and domestic. Just like you have troops in our military sworn to the same oath, and many elected officials also sworn to the same oath. What does that mean? It means they're not held accountable to the governors, they're not held accountable to members of Congress, they are not held accountable to the President of the United States. And if any of those other powers try to pass laws that the sheriffs themselves deem unconstitutional, the sheriffs can decide to not go after it. They can decide to not try to enforce that law. The sheriffs are a stopgap of government overriding the Constitution. And of course, when it comes to the Second Amendment, a lot of sheriffs in the United States are very pro-Second Amendment. They do not believe it's something that can be infringed by Congress, as the Constitution states, by the way. And it seems that this is what's happening here as well, back to what's happening in Illinois. In Illinois, the law they tried passing likely would not hold up in court. Part of me thinks that's why people are just simply choosing not to cooperate with it. But you also have something else happening, which is the local sheriff is saying that they will not enforce the law, notably on constitutional grounds, because the sheriff seems to have that same judgment. Let me show you this. This is Chicago Tribune. It says, among those who issued the letter stating the Illinois law violated the Second Amendment was DuPage County Sheriff James Mendrick, who faced intense criticism from county Democrats, including County Board Chair, that's Deb Conroy, over the refusal to enforce the law. It says Mendrick said he would not send law enforcement officers door to door to see if lawful gun owners had registered their weapons. And by the way, that's actually very dangerous for law enforcement officers as well. Sheriffs sometimes are not only going by the Constitution, they're also going by putting their, deputies in danger. If a sheriff were to knowingly allow his deputies to violate the Second Amendment of the Constitution, which would be, in my opinion, it means that they would be sending them to go and violate people's constitutional rights. And if their sheriff showed up at the door of somebody who, doesn't want their rights to be infringed, well, they might defend themselves. And it's a very dangerous situation to put their deputies in. Now, given the fact that a lot of sheriffs don't agree with the laws like this in the first place, you have many constitutional sheriffs in the United States who have publicly stated that they will not enforce laws like this of any kind. It means that they're doing it not only on the basis of the Constitution, but also on the grounds that people will defend their constitutional rights. And so it's dangerous to them, and they won't do it. Now, back to what the Chicago Tribune says. It says the new law does not require gun owners to register their so-called assault weapons until October of this year, and the outright ban on having assault weapons. This is from a bit ago. And the outright ban on having an assault weapon for anyone not registered to have one doesn't go into effect until 2024. It says Mendrick in late January issued a joint statement with Conroy and State Attorney Bob Berlin, a Republican, that acknowledged door-to-door checks were not part of the law and that the sheriff was committed to enforcing all state and local laws. What does that mean? Well, it's an interesting way of dealing with laws, in my opinion, that likely go against the Constitution. And this is something I think that we're seeing happen a lot, especially with Joe Biden. We've seen Biden have a lot of his attempts to enforce laws, and the Democrats in general trying to enforce laws that are later interpreted to have gone against the Constitution, get overturned on those grounds. And you could actually argue that the amount of, let's say, attempts to override basic rights that have been overturned by the Supreme Court coming from the Democrats have shown that they've been extremely anti-constitutional. But of course, thank goodness we have the Constitution to protect us from such attempts. And this is yet another case of that. And in some ways, at least in my opinion, it was as well, when they try to pass laws that are an obvious violation of the Constitution, whether it's in violation of the First Amendment, the Second Amendment, the Fourth Amendment, or the many others they're going after right now, we see something interesting, which is when they push it too far, it goes to the Supreme Court eventually, and when the Supreme Court makes a judgment on it, or makes their, of course, interpretation of the Constitution, that sets a legal precedent. And when they make that legal precedent, that changes the laws of the whole country. With gun rights right now, one of the major rulings recently was the one from the Supreme Court that all gun laws need to be interpreted in relation to the original writings, historical writings of the Constitution. And if you go by the Founding Fathers, that's a pretty wide slate, let's say. It doesn't seem the Founding Fathers were in support of restricting any kind of weapon. And so it's going to be interesting how this plays out. It says, talk about another story here. Sanctuary cities are preparing for what they're calling a nightmare winter because of mass migration. New York City in particular is running out of money. Taxpayers are being forced to pay for the homes, the food, the basic services of illegal immigrants flooding into the city right now. I wonder how legal that is in general, making American citizens pay the basic living, fees of non-citizens, but hey, it's New York and a few other states, by the way, doing it. But budgets for basic services like sanitation and law enforcement are already being cut to service the illegal immigrants. And as social welfare budgets are being drained to support non-citizens, well, what's happening? Americans are finding there's not enough to go around. And reality is now dawning that when winter comes, which is just around the corner, and sleeping outside on the street is no longer an option because you might freeze to death, well, the city, New York, and several others are facing very serious humanitarian crisis. This situation is not just happening in New York either, as I mentioned. It's happening in every city, mainly run by Democrats, and they've enacted sanctuary city laws, many of them. It just so happens many of them happen to be in the north where it gets very cold. And also, as they try to solve this issue by notably trying to create more migrant facilities, what's happening? They're creating more incentive for mass illegal immigration, which is flooding the facilities they're building to house them, which is making it so they can't deal with it. It's ramping up faster than they can solve it, because every time they try to solve it by giving free handouts, the free handouts incentivize even more people to illegally enter. Let me show you this. This is Politico, by no means a conservative media. It says that northern cities and states that have been overwhelmed by a surge of migrants are now out of room to house them just as the weather turns cold, a potentially life-threatening situation that's inflaming local political tensions as the Biden administration largely leaves these Democrat strongholds to fend for themselves. It says the dual crisis of lowering temperatures when it gets cold during winter. I don't know if they're trying to make a climate change narrative here. Lowering temperatures when winter comes every year, and a lack of shelter space are forcing some jurisdictions to tighten long-standing policies that previously ensured people without homes would have a place to stay, and in some cases confront simmering racial divides, which we'll get into as well. Let me explain. Well, let me show you one more thing first. Epoch Times had a follow-up on this. It said that facing an impending humanitarian crisis in Portland, this is not New York, Family Shelters Director Mike Gerthy has a simple message to anyone who will listen. We need help, he's saying. He says our family shelter facilities, our warming room, and even area hotel space is at capacity. We have maxed out our community resources. This is an individual, he's hands-on frontline worker in the efforts to feed, clothe, and house and continue the continuous flow of foreign nationals arriving in Portland by airplane or bus from the U.S. southern border, told the Epoch Times. And he said this: the time is coming when I'm going to have to look a dad in the face and tell him and his family that I don't know where they're going to sleep tonight. And it's getting cold. Now, the amount of money that they need to house illegal immigrants is massive, and it grows every single day. The more money they give, the more handouts they give, the more food they give, the more free houses they give, the more they build for these people, the more it incentivizes even more people to illegally enter the country to get the free handouts. And even when they get the free handouts, they want more. When they tried moving the illegal aliens in New York City to one of the camps they set up from their fancy hotel rooms, many of them refused to stay there and demanded to be brought back into Manhattan and try to get back into the hotels they were put up in free of cost, because they believe that they're entitled to free handouts. They believe for some reason that we have an incentive to give them 4-star hotels and room service. And anything less than that, they get very angry. They're being promised this in some ways as well. They're being promised free houses, free health care, free food, and many other services with nothing expected from them in return. And mass migration waves are not stopping either. In Illinois, notably, they're planning to spend at least $65 million for a winterized soft shelter site. And guess what? That $65 million facility will only house 2,000 illegal immigrants. And those of you keeping tabs on the amount of illegal immigrants entering the country right now, it is in the millions. The 2,000 that they're going to house with $65 million, and keep in mind, that's just initial costs. Upkeep is going to have to be factored in as well. That 2,000 people is about as many people arriving every few days. In some areas of the U.S., when they try to build housing because of red tape and such, like California, for example, they will spend millions to house just a few people. The amount of bureaucracy, the red tape, the cost it takes to house even one person, let alone millions, is ridiculous, and they don't have the money for it. Now, solving this is very likely going to mean what? Well, the federal government, Joe Biden, will need to intervene. And he's going to likely have to redirect billions, and maybe even more than that, from other projects. So where are they going to take the money from? They're already cutting Social Security because they can't cover the costs. Are they going to take money from Ukraine? Maybe. They're already talking about it. The irony of taking money from a war, notably Ukraine, and possibly Israel as well, is that it also incentivizes the weaponization of migration. You flood and you bankrupt your enemies. This was something that Russia was accused of doing in Europe, by the way. Now, Biden can also choose to redirect money from his other programs, like, for example, DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, or the many environmental programs they're pushing, or who knows what else. What does that mean? It means that they're going to have to take money from all their woke policies to, finance the illegal aliens entering the country that they're incentivizing, notably by giving them free handouts in the first place. And the more free handouts they give them, the more they're going to incentivize more mass migration. They have started the unraveling of a cloth, and the more they pull, the faster it unravels. In other words, the more they try to solve this problem, the bigger they make it. It's a real issue for them, especially when it comes to the other agendas they're trying to push. They're going to have to bankrupt their other agendas to pay for the penalties of the problem they created. And the Democrats in particular will also going to need to deal with something else, which is actually pretty big, which is jealousy. They get a lot of poor voters who want social welfare, free healthcare, and other programs. Filmmaker Dinesh D'Souza, he made an interesting point with some of this, is that a lot of the, social welfare programs and, going out and get people to vote for that type thing, it works like a racket. Basically, the narrative is like this. They go door to door and they say, hey, you're already living off the government. How would you like better treatment from living off the government? We'll give you more money, better food, bigger house. And of course, that's going to come from taxpayers who work hard to pay for it. All you have to do is vote for us. We'll give you a cut. We're going to take more money from this group and we'll give you a cut of it. And that kind of racket they form is how they get a lot of voters. But what happens then when you're telling those people you've told you're going to give them a cut of the money you take through taxes, and you're giving it to non-citizens right in front of their faces? In New York City, this actually became a big issue just recently. There was a big issue we had in a lot of the mainstream media. There were, of course, some of the poor black communities in New York, and people were saying, on camera that, Thanksgiving, for example, they line up, I guess they give some kind of, free turkey program in New York. They said they were lining up for these free turkey programs for Thanksgiving, and these individuals were saying, they hand out the food at 11 o'clock. Normally you go there like, 10:30, 10:45, and, you get your free turkey. They went there and there was a line around the block. The illegal immigrants had gone there way earlier, and by the time the American citizens got to the front of the line, there was nothing left. And now these poor Americans are going to watch as illegal immigrants get the free handouts that they are not even entitled to. Many of these people don't get free houses. Many of these people don't get, well, I guess they get free healthcare these days because of Obamacare. But they don't get the type of treatment the illegal aliens are getting. And when they watch the money and the benefits and so on being handed to people who enter this country illegally and are violating this country's laws and are being allowed to do it, they're going to start taking it personally. And I really think that's going to start showing up at the polls as well. Now, that's it for YouTube, Twitter, Facebook. For the rest of the episode, come join me on Epoch TV. I'll be talking about how U.S. troops want billions in lost wages over vaccine punishment, some other issues as well, but go into the Q&A. Also, I want to hear your thoughts on illegal immigration and a potential nightmare winter. Email me at crossroads@epochtimes.com, EpochTimes.com, and send your thoughts on the illegal immigrant issue as talked about above. It's a new dialogue we're starting on Crossroads. Again, this email, crossroads@epochtimes.com. I want to hear your thoughts on issues as well. So again, email me and we can have kind of a two-way discussion on this. With that said, folks, let's head over to EpochTV.com, EpochTV.com.